And hello to anyone who is joining us after the fact, watching this on the recording. We are glad to know you were following along, and we hope this makes some sense to you. All right, as we begin to look at chapter 17 of Matthew's Gospel, which begins with the story of the Transfiguration, and I think we'll spend a lot of our time on Transfiguration today, it's my suspicion. Our collect for this morning is for the Feast of the Transfiguration from the New Zealand Prayer Book. Let us pray. God of glory, you gave the vision of your Son to those who watched on the mountain. Grant that by our glimpses of him, we may be changed into his glorious likeness, for he is alive and reigns with you and the Holy Spirit, one God forever. Amen.
Amen.
All right. We're going to hold off on the Transfiguration in art just for a second. And what I'd love to do is have someone read the story, and then we'll go back and look at it I think it has a lot to help us, a lot that will help our theological reflection. A reminder that in the church, we celebrate the Feast of the Transfiguration on August 6th, which is a Sunday this year. Deacon Mary is very excited about this because Transfiguration is really important to her personally. She was baptized on the Feast of the Transfiguration a long time ago. And there's also this tradition in the church of bringing forth the first fruits on the Feast of the Transfiguration. So that's why we've been talking so much about it, looking ahead to August 6th. And so it's great that we'll hear this story today as a preamble to that service. So would somebody like to read verses 1 through 13 for us? Thanks, Fred.
After 6 days, Jesus took with him Peter, James, and John, the brother of James, and led them up to a high mountain by themselves. There he was transfigured before them. His face shone like the sun, and his clothes became as white as the light. Just then there appeared before them Moses and Elijah talking with Jesus. Peter said to Jesus, "Lord, it is good for us to be here. If you wish, I will put up 3 shelters, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." While he was still speaking, a bright cloud covered them, and a voice from the cloud said, "This is my son, with whom I am well pleased. Listen to him." When the disciples heard this, they fell face down on the ground, terrified. But Jesus came and touched them. "Get up," he said. "Don't be afraid." When they looked up, they saw no one except Jesus. As they were coming down the mountain, Jesus instructed them, "Don't tell anyone what you have seen until the Son of Man has been raised from the dead." The disciples asked him, "Why then do the teachers of the law say that Elijah must come first?" Jesus replied, "To be sure, Elijah comes and will restore all things. But I tell you, Elijah has already come, and they did not recognize him. But they have done to him everything they wished. In the same way, the Son of Man is going to suffer at their hands." Then the disciples understood that he was talking to them about John the Baptist.
Thanks, Fred. Good morning, Ellie. Well, you're muted.
Good morning, all.
Good morning, everybody.
Where in the world are the Tuppers today?
The Tuppers actually are in Dulles, Virginia.
Wow, you go to the exciting places.
Well,
are you coming back or heading out on a trip?
Right, we're coming back. We flew back yesterday, but Iceland Air lost our plane, or it didn't show up or something. So we had a 3-hour delay, which was very nice because the lounge was very comfortable, but that got us in here at 2:30 in the morning.
Good Lord.
So that's why we're in the hotel in the airport. Please give me a bed.
Oh, good grief.
I'm looking a little frazzled too, but
you are not at all. I'm impressed and honored that you are with us after all of that.
Well, I'm delighted to be here. So stop. He's over in the corner here.
Hello, Bob. So I hope that Elon's experience with Iceland Air was a little bit better last night. I haven't heard otherwise.
Where was she coming from?
Well, she's heading to,
Oh.
well, late last night. You two probably were in the terminal at about the same time.
We should have waved.
She's on her way to Reykjavik and then to pick up a cruise to go up to Norway. And so,
Oh, bless
yeah.
her. That's
Yeah.
fantastic.
So that's where she is today. All right, back to the Transfiguration, a familiar story. What do you hear here? Is there something you notice here? And eventually, John, did the gospel parallels make it to the Bay, or are they back in Bethesda?
No, they are here, and I've got a version out here as well. So I've got
Oh, you are prepared. So let's make our observations first, and then we'll ask John to share what he has discovered about the other versions. What do you notice?
Well, I noticed that this is coming right after 16, of course, although that's artificial number, but where they were told about the upcoming suffering and crucifixion. And I thought, well, no wonder Peter likes it so much there when Jesus is being glorified with Moses and Elijah. And I always thought that was, I mean, I still don't really understand why he says, set up tents or dwelling places, whatever, and we can stay here. But I can see that he'd rather stay there than have to go to Jerusalem.
Exactly. Absolutely. Well put.
I have a question. Are
Yes.
they saying that Elijah is John the Baptist? What
Well,
are they saying at the bottom of there? I don't.
yeah. So what is it? It's Jesus who says it. So Jesus says Elijah is indeed coming and will restore all things. But I tell you that Elijah has already come, and they didn't recognize him, but they did to him whatever they pleased. Then the disciples understood he was speaking to them about John the Baptist. What is that all about? Good question from Kim.
wasn't there a tradition that before the Son of Man would return, Elijah had to appear? I don't know what that's in, or but I thought somewhere in the Old Testament.
It's
Exactly.
certainly implied.
And what happens to Elijah in Kings? Do you remember?
Taken up in a fiery chariot.
Yeah. Chariots of Fire, hence the title of my favorite movie ever.
You and
yeah.
Louise.
So, oh, really? I knew I liked her. So yeah, so traditionally, according to scripture, Elijah doesn't die. He disappears. He's taken up in the whirlwind, off in the fiery chariot. So, and hence, and Kim, you can talk more about this with the Seder, the seat for Elijah. You know, do you want to say anything about that?
I mean, it's, we set a place at the table for Elijah to come in the door, and, supposedly he sits there.
Mm-hmm.
And, for young children nowadays, like we have these gimmicks to where, his wine sort of dissipates and that kind of thing. So he's a presence. I guess I didn't realize what he was coming for other than just Seder dinner, right? Like I didn't know
so
significance.
This is a vision of the end time. And so to save a place for Elijah is like, yeah, if this is the end time, then he will be here. So tying that into what John reminded us about the Son of Man's return. So what do you think Jesus means when he says, okay, Elijah is coming? Yes, that's still out there. And then he says, Elijah has already come. What does that mean?
Ready
I
for
guess-
the end.
Yeah.
What was that?
The prophecy has been fulfilled. The end is here.
Well, the Son of Man will die. Like before he's raised, and that time is now because Elijah has already come in some other in an unidentified form, I guess.
Well, he's come in as John the Baptist, who by this time has been decapitated.
Exactly. Exactly. It's dangerous to be a prophet because your head will could wind up on a platter. And you know,
But wasn't Elijah supposed to, I mean, he wasn't supposed to end up on a platter.
no, but John the Baptist does.
Yeah.
So, but
So how could he be Elijah?
but the point is that so many people assume that he is Elijah, and because of his way of life. And if you recall, going back to what Donna reminded us, the conversation at Caesarea Philippi, when Jesus asks, who do people say that the Son of Man is? They said, some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, still others say Jeremiah. So there's this tension about the end times. So what do you think Jesus means when he says that Elijah has already come? And then, you know, then we get this explanatory gloss at the end of that second paragraph. They understood that he was speaking to them about John the Baptist. Donna, do you have Amy Jill Levine in front of you?
I do, but
Does
there's really not that much meaty information, just kind of referring back to the Old Testament.
I was hoping that she would have something to say about that.
Well,
Let's see.
it says Moses and Elijah, perhaps suggesting that Jesus is the fulfillment of the law and the prophets.
Well, what is Elijah supposed to do when he returns? What is
Purpose?
So
That's a good question, because otherwise, I mean, whatever Elijah was supposed to have done this time, he can't because he's dead.
or he did it before he died?
Good point.
Or does
Then what
Jesus literally saying that John the Baptist is Elijah? I guess that's the underlying question that I'm asking here.
Seems to be.
Well, they think he says it.
Right, exactly. So we're getting this. Yeah, the question is, are the disciples reliable narrators here? I always worry about that. So
let me address the gospel parallels, because Mark does say that but I tell you, Elijah has come, and they did to him whatever they pleased, as it is written about him, period. So in Mark, they have Jesus saying that Elijah has already come, but no reference to John the Baptist. So that it seems Matthew has now added in. Let me explain what Mark was talking about. He was really referring to John the Baptist as being Elijah and having come.
And thank you, very helpful. Matthew often decides that he needs to explicate what Mark has said. How does Luke render it, John?
He does not. It's not there.
Excellent. The transfiguration story is in Luke, but that conversation about Elijah's return is not. What I just looked up in my Amy Jill Levine, and let's see, it says Elijah must come first as forerunner here, specifically of the Messiah, rather than in the Tanakh, Old Testament, as forerunner of the Messianic age. Then on verses 12 and 13, Amy Jill says Elijah has already come, referencing John the Baptist. Rabbinic literature varies regarding Elijah's precise messianic role and duties. And then there are a whole bunch of notes that we don't have time to look up. But she does say Elijah comes to make peace in the world. Elijah refers to his earthly return. Elijah will not return on certain festival eves. Well, that's not particularly helpful. So there's some tension here about the breaking of the kingdom of God, the return, the messianic age, the end times, the eschatological vision. That's that coffee hour or cocktail party word that I know you're just going to love throwing out there. So, this idea, and going back to what Donna said, this ties, absolutely ties back to chapter 16. Again, those chapter numbers are artificial, but the placement of this story right after, regardless of what the chapter and verse divisions are, there's no denying that Matthew, or when this was edited together, Matthew, whoever is, edited Matthew, put these side by side. And so, again, pointing to the end times, pointing to this messianic vision, and we're going to go back and look at what that means, looking at that first paragraph. Question for you about this transitional language at the very beginning of chapter 17, 6 days later. We know, again, Donna reminded us what just happened. Peter saying, say it isn't so. And Jesus tells them that he has to suffer. Jesus says, get behind me, Satan. You are a stumbling block, blah, blah, blah. 6 days later. What might that specific language trigger for this audience? What might that, what's that? Sabbath. Okay, good. Sabbath, the completion of creation. Someone else was going to say something. I'm sorry, I talked over you.
I said creation.
So what's the significance of that with regard to the transfiguration story? This is one of those moments, these pyrotechnical moments in the Bible where oftentimes we just sort of scratch our heads and say, really? Did it really happen this way? The ascension being another one of those moments. For some people, the resurrection stories are like that. But what is the significance theologically of putting this story right after Peter's denial and Jesus's questions about what people are saying about him?
It kind of proves Jesus's point when he's telling Peter who he is.
Proves his point.
The end of the world.
End of the old world.
Creation. The
Can you say?
creation has been. Okay, go ahead.
No. Go ahead, Fred. What were you going to say?
No, I mean, the creation, has been completed, and this is the end of the creation.
Okay. So let's tie that in with what Ray just said about the end of the old world. Can you say more about that, Ray?
Yeah, well, not a lot more, but I think, the language we've picked up over the years is that Jesus is bringing a new creation, a new world order, if you will, to dilute it a little bit, but a whole new world is dawning. It isn't that Jesus is, putting his hands in the clay, but he is opening the gates to a new world.
Beautiful. And how do we connect that back to the previous chapter, the previous encounter at Caesarea Philippi? I mean, these are two radically different stories, cheek by jowl. And Donna already pointed out that Peter is a common denominator in both stories, and his reactions, I think we are meant to kind of view these stories through Peter's eyes, exactly as Donna said at the outset.
I mean, to me, it's almost kind of a sad, childish sort of this is like verse 4 that I'm talking about, kind of a wistful, oh, it's good to be here. Let's stay here. Now let's stay in Disney World forever. Because I mean, it's, you know, now they're getting the real kind of supernatural miraculous stuff of seeing these visions, and you know, who wouldn't want to stay there instead of getting back on the road and going into danger?
Beautiful. Go ahead.
I was taught or informed or thought that the three tents would be like tabernacles, with shrines would be Inukshuks, cairns or something, to celebrate this, to commemorate this incredible appearance, and people could come and worship there, that sort of thing. It wasn't, never really got the impression that he wanted to live there.
Hang on 1 second.
To stay there for any length of time, but certainly to
Let's look
commemorate. Sorry?
Let's look at the Greek.
That's what's in front of us. So a tent, a tabernacle, of that well-known movable temple of God, after the pattern of which the temple of Jerusalem was built. Not the best articulated definition. I think that could be edited. Your work, Ellie, here. But you know, so this idea of a tabernacle, what's the point of a tabernacle?
A place to worship, yes.
Place to worship, yes. And if you think about our Jewish friends in the fall, what festival do we, you know,
Sukkot.
Sukkot. And
Okay.
especially when I was working in Potomac, my goodness, because there's a very significant Jewish population in Potomac. You couldn't go down a block without seeing a sukkah erected. And it was so cool because they were so different and so beautiful. And so this idea of, you know, it's temporary, it's a temporary movable dwelling, and it's meant to remind the people about, you know, God's provision on the journey. And so it makes sense to me that Peter, for all the reasons Donna was saying, you know, Peter's really struggling here. And, you know, Peter's sort of like every man, every disciple. He's the one who lives his questions out loud in a way some of the others don't. And thank goodness he does, because he's accessible, I think. And so he's really struggling with this idea of the suffering servant, of a Messiah. How could a Messiah have to die in a brutal death? And, you know, he focuses so much on the suffering. We talked about this 2 weeks ago. He doesn't so much pay attention to the rest of the story when Jesus says, oh, by the way, 3 days later, you know, Peter can't hear that, and which is human, right? He's so worried about this idea of suffering. And so then we get this vision, and the storyteller sets it up 6 days later. And Ray always reminds us, you know, thinking about this as a campfire story, think about the narrator saying, after all that, 6 days later, if you're a good Jew, you know, that language resonates for you, that talks about creation, Sabbath, completion, new creation. And then suddenly his face shone like the sun, and Moses and Elijah are there. And so Peter's getting an opportunity to interpret this scene, and he's like, okay, all right, got it. Let's worship here. And so this is good. The other, not so good. Don't say it isn't so, Jesus. This is good. And so, you know, Donna's point is really helpful in terms of Peter's shifting perspective. You know, now he can kind of get the good news. I still wonder if he connects the dots, though, with the conversation he just had. Go ahead, Ray.
I've looked at it, and I had not picked up the tabernacle or tent as a place to worship. I looked at this maybe through Peter's eyes and say, I don't know what this is, but it's real enough, and these guys are going to need shelter if we're going to stay here. And I can do that. I can build a tent.
I know.
Finally,
I-
something
That's
I
something
can
I don't
do.
have to understand it, but it was so real. And I think from a storyteller's point of view, it reinforces the intensity of what happened,
Beautiful.
like a resurrection appearance.
Ah, yes. And so this is very much meant to be sort of a preview of coming attractions in the midst of this journey to Jerusalem, right? And so it's really interesting that after that terribly difficult conversation between Jesus and Peter, and I think it's just worth looking at that for 1 second again. I know we know it, but first of all, when Jesus says, okay, who do people say the Son of Man is? I'm up here at the top. And then they answer, and then Jesus says, well, who do you say that I am? Who cares what the people in the street are saying? I want to know what my closest followers and friends are saying. Simon, you are the Messiah. Jesus says, go to the head of the class. I'm going to, you're the rock. Here are the keys. Here you all the rice-a-roni and all the prizes are coming. Woo-hoo. And then, then he immediately tells, begins to tell them the rest of the story. And Peter takes him aside and rebukes him, saying, God forbid it, Lord, this must never happen to you. And then Jesus says, get behind me, Satan. You are a hindrance to me. This is the same guy he just said was the rock, and he's the same guy to whom he's given the keys to the kingdom. And now he's calling him a hindrance, for you are setting your mind not on divine things, but on human things, which is, it's harsh. It may be true, but it's really harsh. And then 6 days later, Jesus gives them all a vision of the divine.
Looks to me like Peter has had one hell of a week. Because I remember Jeff McKnight, one of his kids' homilies where he sits on the floor and explains this, and had all the grown-ups and kids nodding, say, yeah, Peter was really boggled by now. So it's here, let's set up a tabernacle. I don't know what else to do this.
Exactly.
So yeah, he's had a lot to think about for the last week.
Well, let's look at it from Peter's standpoint, though. Jesus is saying, I will come back. The logical thing for Peter to assume was Jesus was coming back as a ghost. Spirits were, an accepted part of the, the world back then.
Well, that's true. Nobody had been actually physically resurrected yet.
And, there was no resurrection, and the emphasis during, on Jesus' return that he has a body, that he has flesh, that he's a real person. I think I can understand, Peter's discomfort, because if Jesus is coming back as a ghost, that's kind of against Jewish tradition also. So how do you square that circle if there's only one God and there are only angels, and and he says he's coming back?
And we end up with the story of Jesus appearing in the closed room.
And doubting Thomas and all this that is designed really
Different
to
gospel.
emphasize.
Just want to say that, different gospel.
Yeah, but still, I mean, I can see how Peter, wouldn't get it, because it's totally, one, he has an explanation that most of the people in his world would accept without question. He comes back as a spirit, he's reincarnated as a god like Augustus, however you want to play it. And then this other thing that he hasn't even ever considered.
Well, and that's what I mean when I say, Peter is sort of the everyman, because, and I really do think that we're supposed to struggle through this along with Peter for exactly that reason. This is all brand new to him. And so I guess my point too is Jesus says to Peter, "Get behind me, Satan." You know, remember, Satan is the one who gets in the way of the purposes of God. But that's not the end of the story, right? Because Jesus gets annoyed with Peter, he chastises him, but 6 days later, Peter is privileged to have this vision. I don't, well, let me ask you this. Why is Jesus transfigured?
Well, can I take this in a slightly different direction?
Sure.
Instead of focusing on Peter, I'm focusing more on Jesus himself.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he's just been talking about what he's got to go through, and he realizes it's death and suffering, and he knows he's God and he's going to get resurrected. So in the end, it's going to be okay. But that process isn't going to be any fun. And I think he's tempted by what Peter says.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
I don't have to go through this. And
I'm
I
inclined
think,
to agree
I
with
think,
you.
I think he spent those 6 days trying to buck up his courage and to feel strong enough to go through with this. And the transfiguration is an attempt to give him the courage and the strength to go through with it. He gets reminded in a most direct way that he is God's beloved son. And it's going to work out okay at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm.
And then at the final section, it's all over, and they saw no one except Jesus himself alone.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm thinking to myself, what's he thinking at that point? What's going on inside of him after that tremendous experience? And
Did he know that was going to happen?
I
mean,
don't know. I don't know.
So
Maybe.
that's a good question, because did he transfigure himself, or was he just standing on a mountain and boom?
Why did he go up the mountain if he wasn't going to?
Well,
Make a point.
he and God are one, so I'm sure that it wasn't a surprise to him. But the result, though, is that the human side of him is reassured and comforted, but he's alone at this point. He's now fully human and bucked up to face the sacrifice of his own suffering and death. Anyhow, that's my take. It's not less focused on Peter and much more focused on Jesus himself.
That's
I
a
think that-
really interesting and compelling interpretation, Mark. I like that. A couple of things that I would just add. Fred asked the question, why does he go up the mountain? Well, we know for many chapters now, Jesus keeps trying to go up the mountain to pray, and every time he does, something interrupts him, right? So there is this desire for time apart. So whether he knows that it's coming or not, it's kind of understandable, that impulse. It's interesting. The language that we get in English is passive voice, isn't he? Verse 2. He was transfigured before him. Doesn't say he transfigured himself. Also doesn't say God the Father transfigures him. It says he was transfigured. So that's kind of open-ended. Couple of
It
other.
wasn't, I thought it didn't Moses have the same experience? Go up a mountain,
Yeah,
shine on the face, and clothes dazzle, and
That's exactly where I was going. When did that happen? When did that happen, John? Do you remember?
10 Commandments, I thought.
Yeah. When Moses goes up the mountain to receive the law, he encounters God, he comes back down, and his face is so, it's
He had to wear a
glowing.
veil.
He has to veil himself so that people can perceive it. I mean, it's so powerful, it would be overwhelming. So, this is not such a subtle passage. I mean, it's like, especially for a Jewish audience, like, oh, yeah. And then Moses and Elijah are visible there. And we can ask ourselves, we could spend the next 2 months arguing about, are they literally there? Is this a vision that people had? Again, I don't have the answer key. But where else do we hear this language about Jesus being the beloved and being well pleased?
his baptism.
Baptism.
When he was baptized.
At his baptism, to whom is that that line addressed?
To Jesus.
Yeah. Now, to whom is it addressed?
Disciples are there.
This is my son, the beloved. Listen to him. So that's, I agree, Mark, that I think there's very much something going on that this is intended for Jesus. I'm not sure that it's to the exclusion of the disciples, because I do think this is meant to show the disciples something as well. And the fact that it comes right after Jesus has this confrontation, or 6 days after this confrontation with Peter, it gives me confident, or not confidence, comfort that that's not the end of the story with Peter. You know, that, yeah, he's annoyed. Yeah, Peter, you know, listen to me. You should just take my word for it. You can hear him getting frustrated. And then this moment happens, and they all have this aha. You know, we often hear this story during the season of Epiphany in January, February. And well, not often, we always hear it. It's always the last Sunday of the season of Epiphany. We have the Transfiguration. It's sort of the ultimate aha, like, oh, okay.
I feel like maybe he's doing it, or God, or, you know, whoever instigates this transformation, because he's really asking his disciples. He's always had them along the ride for, you know, the faith in Jesus. You know, he has these healing powers, he has this, but to come back from the dead or be resurrected, or just, you know, knowing the intensity of what's about to happen, he kind of needs to get people to double down on their faith in him. And I feel like this moment allows for that to happen, to go, okay, we've been with you all along, and now, you know, it's reinforced that, because their faith is going to be put to the biggest test, I guess, you know, and this ensures that, you know, they have some real armor going into this, you know.
Beautiful. And that faith is going to be put to the test pretty darn soon, because you know, from this point on, we're headed toward the cross, right? And sorry for all these pop-ups. In Luke's gospel, you know, there comes a point where Luke says, from that point on, Jesus set his face toward Jerusalem. We don't get that language so directly here, but this is when he comes down from the mountain. This is where he's going. So that's really helpful.
This, Patty, and let me just add in 2 points from the gospel parallels. In Luke, it is now about 8 days later. But I think that's still consistent with a full week Sabbath creation and the start of something new. But the other thing Luke adds in is when Elijah and Moses appear with Jesus, according to Luke, but not in Mark or Matthew, they start talking to Jesus of his departure, which he was about and which he was about to accomplish at Jerusalem. So he's foreshadowing what's going to come right here in the Transfiguration.
Beautiful. And I believe that the Greek word for departure in Luke is connected with Exodus. I would have to go back and look it up, and that would be a red herring at this point. But thank you for that. Very helpful. I just wanted to add in the Greek, the word that we get translated as transfigured is metamorphou, obviously, metamorphosis, transformation. And so there's something, you know, this idea of transformation is at the heart of this story. I wanted to show us, to have us think about, because we love to do this, at least, well, I'll speak for myself. I love to do this. I wanted to look at some art together, and I think it's kind of cool. You know, the Transfiguration is one of those stories that I think artists have been trying to render since the stories, were promulgated. And how they do it is really interesting. You could Google transfiguration in art and you'll get some really interesting, some of it kind of cheesy and schlocky and woo, but others, theologically really interesting. And I just picked out a few. This could be a separate session for us. But I just picked out a few for us to look at to see if it shines any light, pun intended, on the story. So, here's one from Italy, obviously a mosaic at the Vatican. Any thoughts about that?
I assume that some of the figures around him are Moses and Elijah.
Mm-hmm. This one here with the horns,
With the horns.
that's Moses.
Okay.
I don't know if this is Elijah.
Oh, that would be because they're on that side. I need to footnote why Moses has horns because I hadn't heard of that before. I'll look it up later.
I can tell you, it's a mistranslation of the word for shone or shine.
Mm-hmm.
And it was in one of just an error in Bible translation.
If you look at some of Chagall's work, Chagall has some really interesting images of Moses with the horns. And then you think,
it's kind of a mistranslation of rays of light, I guess, or something.
yeah.
So yeah.
Thank you, Ray.
Probably.
Thank you, Ray. Anyway, sorry. The humor has gotten worse. All right. What do you notice? Do you notice anything? I know it's bad. It's July. What can I say? Do you notice anything else that's helpful? Puzzling?
Well, if that is Elijah there, he's got his hand out in a gesture of presenting or indicating. Moses looks worshipful, but that's
Which one is Peter, Patty? Is
That's
he
good
identified
question.
by a
white-haired
hairdo?
one, I think.
What was that, Ellie?
I think he's the white-haired one, isn't he? Isn't he supposed to be the older?
That's how I have always seen that Peter's understood often as a little bit older. Again, that's more tradition than anything we get from scripture, but I think so. I think the guy in the middle here is probably Peter, and these are James and John, the other two inner circle guys. Of course, they're all white. Not a big surprise. Interesting with the mosaic, though. I think it's lovely how the tiles bring out the light. It's kind of shimmery and sparkly in a way that painting doesn't necessarily do. Well, let's look at another one. Also Italian. And you can see here are Moses's little baby horns again, traditionally. Anything that this brings out that maybe the other didn't, or anything that interests you?
good Pentecostal is slain in the spirit.
Yeah. Yeah, shielding their eyes.
Yeah, the disciples are all flattened. And then there's Peter down there on the right, kind of get me out away from this.
Come out here. Yeah. And again, a similar trope of Moses and Elijah, kind of like, ta-da, here he is. And the disciples are struggling, to say the least. Here's a very different one, an American one. I don't know if this adds anything to the story for you.
I like that he's brown skinned.
Mm-hmm. Me too. And is this a woman down here? I'm not sure. It's a female artist.
So at the top is Moses and Elijah, and then there's Peter, James,
And
and the
John,
brother.
yes.
Okay,
John.
Peter, James. Yeah, okay.
What do you notice about the feet of Jesus and Moses and Elijah?
They're not touching the ground.
They're
not
floating.
Yeah. And you know, they have clouds above their heads, so you kind of get this otherworldly sense about them. Jesus's robe is white. There's some light down here, but it doesn't seem to be emanating from Jesus as much. And again, these are all interpretations. Each one of us could come up with their own.
Patty, you froze.
You're frozen.
Oh, sorry. Hang on.
Skirts.
Back.
Yay.
Yay.
You're
Sorry
back,
about
yeah.
that. Sorry about that. What I think I was saying just as I froze was that each of these images is just an interpretation. Each one of us could come up with our own, and it would be interesting to see how we might do that. Here's another one. What do you notice about this one?
Elijah has a crown in his hands.
Mm-hmm.
And are the 10 Commandments in
Yeah.
Moses's hands?
Looks that way. Whoops, sorry. Ah, didn't mean to do that. What about the feet again?
Floating.
Not
Doing the
touching.
poltergeist thing.
Yeah.
But Jesus's feet are firmly on the ground.
Are they?
Well, I think they are.
They could be. We can't see the heels, so we can't know.
Mhm.
Well, true. But what is this meant to look like?
The world.
The earth.
Yeah, so it's more, I would say this is more cosmic. It's not located on a specific mountain. This
Could
one,
that be,
oh, go ahead, John.
could that be the vault of heaven?
Ah,
Mm.
lovely. Lovely. Yeah. All right, here's
Why
another.
is the one covering their eyes? Oh, because the light, because
There always seems to be one of them that's going like this.
blinded by the light.
Mhm.
Blinded or scared. Yeah. Oops, sorry. I'm trying to make this one smaller so you can get this one's kind of harder to see, and I'm not sure let me do this. Okay. Whoops. Can you see this one?
Mhm.
I'll send you all the slides so you can look at them separately, but what do you think about this one?
Definitely floating.
I think this guy is Scottish, if I recall. I'll have to look him up. I'm so sorry. Okay.
Howson's is Scott's name, I think.
Well, and then here's,
Jesus
oh, go
meant
ahead.
to be the light source.
Yeah, here it really seems to be coming from Jesus. But yeah, woo, I think Fred used the word poltergeist before. Talk about, this ethereal sense of Jesus, and it's so dark except for Jesus. And here you got someone covering their eyes again. Moses and Elijah seem to be leaning into the light, which is interesting. And then
he's glowing so much that he's becoming elongated. His outline is blurred.
yeah.
Moving as he approaches the speed of light. That would happen.
That's right.
There you go. Good explanation from physics. Yep. Well, and then here's the last one I wanted to show. Edward Nippers, and I wanted to spend just a moment on this one. This one's kind of significantly different.
Yes, they're naked.
They're naked. Yeah.
Yes, they're naked.
When was
Um,
this painted?
What's this?
When was it painted?
Well, Nippers is a contemporary artist, so 20th century, I don't know the exact date.
Okay, so
I can find that out for us.
we had discovered anatomy by then.
mhm.
Why would he portray them as naked?
Well, I'm gonna give you a little quote from his artist statement in a moment, but I'd love for us to wrestle with that first. Why do you suppose he would portray them all as naked?
Because it's the most human, basic, earthy part of the body, and yet the heads are kind of disappearing and the feet are kind of disappearing, and so
Yeah.
somehow he's celebrating the humanity of these three myths. And of course, it reflects all the crucifixes too. So
Lovely. And it looks like there's a tiny little halo around Jesus.
yeah,
He's obviously the source of the light or enshrouded by the light. But there's also that little halo. So a nod to more traditional iconography. Anything else?
Not quite consistent with the text, which says his clothes became dazzling white.
Yeah.
So,
mhm.
Fine.
Well,
And
his
the-
birthday suit becomes dazzling. Yeah. Anything else before I show you what Nippers himself said?
the disciple on the bottom right is kind of a tangle. I can't even figure
Yeah,
out if that's a person or not.
it's hard for me to see as well.
Well, you're born naked, and I mean, William Blake said that babies are trailing clouds of glory.
Beautiful.
Yeah, Blake said
Like
that.
they've gone back to their state before they were flesh.
Lovely. What do you make of sort of these two planes here? So you can almost see, I can see a horizontal division here. You know, the disciples are dark and enfleshed. This one, whoever it is, almost looks like he's either holding up or, you know, like Atlas, or pushing away this vision. Again, that's how I'm seeing it. Maybe you see it differently. Is there anything to be made of these different color palettes?
Again, I think
Well,
the feet and legs are so earthly, and then as they progress up the figures, they become more and more amorphous and spiritual, I guess.
Hmm. Mm-hmm.
you know,
Ray,
earth colors.
something?
I was just going to say, I mean, and that's along Ellie's lines. I mean, the earth colors are very, very human, very earthy, very tangible, and the others have that ethereal quality.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's see what Nippers has to say. Would someone like to read, and I'm going to send you the full article. I just excerpted part of it here. Would someone like to read this for us from Nippers?
I can read it.
Thanks, Kim.
The human body is at the center of my artistic imagination because I'm covered by a little verb, a blurb here. It's like I don't know if somebody can read those two words.
Body is.
Christian doctrines of creation, incarnation, and resurrection. Disembodiment is not an option for the Christian. Christ places his body and his blood at the heart of our faith in him. Physicality is messy, it is demanding, and always a challenge to control. The naked human body is one way of starkly stating that we have nowhere to hide. We are more comfortable with a disembodied voice on the line or a virtual image on a screen that move our human interactions, even consciousness, from the concrete into a virtual realm. Then we are with the real world. When we must deal with the physicality of the real world, it is increasingly uncomfortable.
Thank you.
Wow.
Yeah, wow is right.
You know, it's interesting, not to look too much, but it doesn't make it obvious that Jesus is circumcised in this picture. And I would think that he would be. He's, you know, just to bring that up
Mm-hmm.
as Jewish people.
Mm-hmm. Well, and we know that he was in the temple. What do you make of Nipper's statement?
Well, I think that for me, the thing that summarizes it is that last line: when we must deal with the physicality of the real world, it is increasingly uncomfortable. And that says to me what the incarnation is about. That's tangibilitates it. I mean,
Exactly. I was hoping you'd use that word. I love when you say that. Absolutely. It's not this disembodied, ethereal notion of God. It's God with flesh and blood. It's God whose body is broken. So it's really interesting to see the transfiguration, which seems to be a story about the ethereality of God, of Jesus, to see it depicted in such a concrete, tangible, human, physical way. Anything else about this? And again, I will send all of this to you because there's a lot to mull on here. I find it, the Nippers piece just opened the story up for me in a completely different way. And so I wanted to share that with you. And then I wanted to share one final thought from a commentary on this passage from Ronald Allen, who says, our encounter with Jesus should leave the church a transfigured community, present in the old age, but shining with the light of the new. And that might be a place for us to pick up next time, to think about what that means for the disciples, what it means for us. Remember, in chapter 16, in that encounter between Jesus and Peter, Jesus says, Peter, you are the rock on which I will build my church. It's the first time this idea of church is expressed directly in the Gospels. And so we think about what is the point of this story? I mean, it's a kind of a cool story. It's kind of a weird story. You know, what? And I love, Mark, that you talked about it being for Jesus's benefit, because, you know, I don't think that can possibly be neglected. We have to bring that into our interpretation. As you know, if Jesus is human and we say that he is, then he needs to hear this and see this as much as Peter and the rest of us do. So that was really helpful. All right, any last thoughts? All right, I will send all of this out to you. We can cogitate on it, inwardly digest it this week, up here next Wednesday.
thank you.
Thank
you,
you
Patty.
Thank
you all.
you.
all so much, as ever. Wonderful.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.